Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 4th Annual Animal Law Symposium at Duke Law. It's an honor to have you all here. My name is Jeremy Sharp. I'm the co-president of the student chapter of the Animal Legal Defense Fund here at Duke Law. As a student chapter of the Animal Legal Defense Fund, we share the ALDF's mission of protecting and advancing the interests of animals through the legal system. Our agenda today will be 4 speaker events representing various animal rights advocacy organizations connected to North Carolina and beyond. Each speaker will consist first of a presentation by our speaker, and then a Q&A session will follow. In between each speaking session, we'll have a brief break, so you'll have time to go to the restroom, get more food, just stretch your legs if you'd like, but you're free to do so quietly throughout every event as well. Following these events, we'll have a vegan lunch served buffet style outside around noon. Now, the theme of this year's symposium is the choices we make and the animal impact. I know right now a lot of us feel powerless in general. There's so much happening in the world, so much change, and it's easy to feel like you have no control over anything. Billions of animals are slaughtered every day, and their horrific treatment and murder is enabled by systems run by people and organizations with more money and influence than I personally will ever know. However, while systemic change is crucial, we cannot underestimate how important individual action is. Many of us have considerable privilege as human beings. We can talk to people, we can connect, we're not confined to gestation crates. Our society has placed humans above all other living things, so we might as well use that privilege wisely. There's a quote I really like. Saving one animal won't change the world, but saving that animal will change the world for that one animal. Our smallest acts can mean everything to someone, and over time, individual choices can build into collective action. You all made a conscious decision to attend this symposium today, and at the very least, your choice to come here means a lot to me. By being here, you're choosing to demonstrate an awareness and empathy for non-human beings that factory farms and other animal abusers would like to suppress. So thank you for coming. And now it is time for our first speaker. Vicki would like to introduce her.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vicki Liu, and I'm the co-president of Duke Law ALDF. It's my honor to introduce our first speaker today, Bailey. Bailey Frank is a Durham-based litigation attorney and a Duke Law alum. Following law school, Bailey was selected as a Litigation Fellow for the Animal Legal Defense Fund, where she played a pivotal role in cases protecting endangered species, defending California's landmark Proposition 12, and shutting down kitten-mill operations across the U.S. She later joined the Gerber Animal Law Center as an associate, litigating on behalf of companion animal rescue organizations. Bailey serves as the board of directors for the Piedmont Farm Animal Refuge and contributes to national policy discussions as a member of the ABA Subcommittee on Animals in Agriculture. She has been a vegan for over a decade and shares her home with her beloved rescue companions, Pomegranate and DD. Without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our speaker, Bailey.
Thanks. All right, can you guys hear me okay on the mic? Great. So if you signed up for this event more than a week ago, I'm probably not the speaker you expected to see, but I'm honored to be here nonetheless. I always love the chance to talk about animal law. When I was here at Duke Law School, I was a member of the student chapter, and it's so exciting to see that this room is still full and that this event is happening, and that people are as invested in this as they were when I was here, and more so. Before I kind of get started, I do want to tailor my presentation a little bit. So if by a show of hands you could tell me if you are a lawyer or a law student. So mostly no. Great. All right. So that's helpful for me to know because it will allow me to talk about some things differently than I might have otherwise. But I think in general, when I looked at the theme of this event, it was, do our individual choices make a difference? And this is a lawyer joke, so you may or may not get it, but as anyone who may know a lawyer, who's been to law school, who loves a lawyer, who birthed a lawyer may know, the answer to questions like this is almost always, it depends. Any question of law, if you ever go to a lawyer and you ask them, do I have a lawsuit? They'll probably tell you it depends. So when something depends on multiple factors, I find it helpful to break the question down. So before I go any further, one important question to ask is, should you bother listening to me at all? Why am I up here? You showed up at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. Am I worth listening to? I don't know. That's up to you to decide. And I'm not a sociologist, so I'm not going to be speaking about, the impact of collective action. That's something I accept is real. That's something I accept is important. And I know that our other speakers work directly and will speak directly to that. What I'm going to talk about is the questions I have found are very helpful to me when I'm making important decisions in my life. That can be a daily decision, like what I eat. That can be a career decision, like where I work. And that can be a social decision, like who I choose to spend my time with and the discussions that I choose to have. Over the course of my activism and my veganism and my career, I've found that specific theories we may have heard about, right? Utilitarianism, relativism, these philosophies in the abstract can be very interesting. You can read philosophy on animal rights, but it doesn't often help me when I'm faced with a choice of what to do. So I've come up with kind of 3 questions in my life that I ask about almost every decision, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. And I'm going to share it in the 3 buckets of individual choice, career choices, and social choices. So I know we got a little bit of a bio about me, but generally, this is kind of the bullet point. So I went to Duke Law School, had an amazing time, worked for the Animal Legal Defense Fund. Then I worked with Callie Gerber at Gerber Animal Law, who is a Raleigh-based animal law firm. So I did nonprofit, and then I worked with her, and she does civil litigation. So she's not a nonprofit, she's actually a private law firm. And now I work at a firm in Raleigh, and I serve on the ABA Subcommittee for Animals and Agriculture, and I work with Lenore, who is here today, on the board of Piedmont Refuge. So I'm going to change my guiding question a little bit, since it's at the Animal Law Symposium, and it's, does what I do with my life make a difference for animals? So obviously you can ask about, does what I do make a difference? Is what I'm doing having an impact for almost any social justice issue, any issue of oppression? So we're going to tailor this one, obviously, today specifically to animals. And like I said, I'm going to be talking about daily choices, career choices, and social choices. I know from just listening to conversations that most people here are vegan, if not everyone, so that will make the first conversation a little bit easier for you to understand and to hopefully resonate with you. But even if you're not, or if you have people who are not, I think these are also questions that you can pose to them, that you can also use to explain to people who will inevitably ask you about your veganism. Now, the other thing that lawyers love to do is to define definitions. So when you have a law, you may think it's super clear. Well, it's probably not, because the lawyer is going to tell you it actually depends. So you like to go deep. Judges argue in 15-page briefs and 15-page opinions about what one word could possibly mean. So to help kind of funnel the discussion today, I am also going to define what I mean by making a difference, and that are those 3 questions I mentioned. So when I'm faced with a decision, I ask first, does this choice reduce individual animal suffering? Is what I'm going to do today, or this choice that I'm going to make, actually going to impact an individual animal? I love the quote that Jeremy mentioned. It may not impact all the animals, it may not have a writ large impact, but is it going to impact potentially the life of one animal by making this decision? Does this choice help in systemic animal abuse? So is this choice that I'm making maybe not going to impact an individual animal? Maybe, it's not actually going to make a concrete difference when it comes to the life of an animal today or tomorrow, but systemically, is this going to help change and end animal cruelty? And does this choice influence cultural and societal attitudes towards animals? So this is the third question I'll ask, because sometimes we're faced with decisions like career choices, for example, where it's not always an option for everyone to be directly involved with animals or to be working against some sort of systemic issue. So the other question to ask yourself is, does this choice influence cultural and societal attitudes? Because that inevitably lends itself to a change and an impact for animals in the long run. So, veganism. I'm sure everyone who is vegan or vegetarian or has been to dinner with a vegan has thought about what happens when a non-vegan dish is put in front of you. And someone says, well, the animal's already dead. What's the difference? I've bought this thing, you know, we're at a group dinner, it's an appetizer, it comes out, it's got cheese or a dead animal on it, and well, it's already dead. How is this choice making a difference, right? What is this actually doing? Okay, so you look at the first question, does this choice reduce individual animal suffering? Maybe not, right? I didn't purchase it, so it's not my consumer choice. You're right, it's already here. It might go to waste. Okay, so does that mean the answer is maybe not, probably not, I don't think so, I should not be vegan? No, I just move on to the second question, which is, does this choice help in systemic animal abuse? Now in that context, you might also lean, maybe not really. Because again, no one's gonna know that I'm not eating this thing except for me, and you know, the waitress doesn't know, they brought the food, and you know, it is what it is. But in this particular instance, I think the third question, does this choice help influence cultural and societal attitudes towards animals, is really important. Because by saying no, I'm telling everyone at the table, I'm reinforcing within myself that no, I actually don't view this as food, right? This is a dead animal. I think of this as not just a black and white, you know, I'm paying to have meat, I'm not paying to have meat, and that's the difference veganism makes. It's so much more than that. So when it comes to a daily choice, I find myself often focused on this third question, because while we said like collective action in the aggregate, you know, some estimates say vegans save, what is it, like 200 animals a year or something? Okay, but when billions of animals are being slaughtered, that can feel pretty inconsequential. It can matter, and I think it's important, but it doesn't actually move everybody, right? So especially when you're faced with someone who has not confronted veganism, who has not thought about veganism, who's like, well, 200 animals, what is that, right? It can feel like it doesn't really matter. But if you focus on the third question, it can, right? Vegan milk options, vegan meat options, you know, options at restaurants have expanded exponentially because people now give a shit, right? That there are options for vegans. When I first went vegan over 10 years ago, there was no Impossible Burger. There was no, you know, vegan delicious sausage. There was diet cheese that didn't melt and tasted like plastic. And there was tofu, which is great, but, you know, that's it. And it was, you know, a lot more difficult, quote unquote, to replace things or explain to people that I wasn't giving something up than it is now. And that is because of this third thing, cultural and societal attitudes, right? It is not necessarily because there are more vegans, like, you know, hardcore vegans. Some estimates say yes, some studies actually say no, that it's about the same if you look at the percentage of the population. So, you know, it is what it is. Yeah, not a sociologist, not, you know, a data scientist. It's very hard to measure that. But what you can measure is that if I go into a restaurant and I tell the waiter or waitress that I'm vegan, they're no longer looking at me like, what does that mean? Right? The culture and societal attitudes have changed. So when it comes to my daily choices, specifically with veganism, I like this framework because it doesn't matter if 2 out of the 3 answers are no. Right? I don't think any one of these answers is necessarily more important than the other. As long as one of these is yes, I would say that I'm making a difference and I'm making an impact. And so that has really helped me as I've gone through my different professional careers, especially when you're working in different environments. So when I worked at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, everyone was vegan. We went on work retreats, everything was vegan. Didn't matter. I now work at a firm, right? I am the only vegan. I'm working in a corporate world. Right? People are not used to this. Part of networking, part of growing your client base is taking people out to dinner. And so it can sometimes feel like, well, you know, I'm going to have to justify my choices more. I'm going to have to think about this more. But I always come back to this. Even in, you know, and this kind of ties into the career thing, but even in a career where I'm not working directly with animals anymore, right, on a day-to-day basis, I still have the opportunity to do that. Change societal and cultural attitudes towards animals. So I ask the same 3 questions when I consider my career. So coming out of law school, I worked as a litigation fellow, like I said, with the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And when I was deciding what I wanted to do, I also asked myself these 3 questions. Now, working at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, does this choice reduce individual animal suffering? I went into it thinking, yes, I'm going to. But when you're actually in it, doing, brief writing and discovery, and you're litigating for animals, and you're dealing with all of, these legal challenges, it often felt very demoralizing that this felt like no a lot of the time. Because I'm working on Prop 12, right, at the time, which is, is anyone familiar with Prop 12? Okay, so I'm familiar. So basically, it was a California proposition that changed the way that certain farmed animals were allowed to be raised with the space that they were supposed to have, and it was supposed to go into effect many years ago. But of course, it faced legal challenges. And then it went up before the Supreme Court while I was working there. And so we're brief writing, we're working with counsel, we're making all of these arguments just to try and get this law that was put into effect and supposed to be going into effect validated, right? And that took like 5 or 6 years. So the change wasn't happening in those 5 or 6 years. So I'm over here like, I'm working to make this happen. It still might get struck down. What are we actually doing for animals right now? I have to take the long-term view, but then, at the time you also had to change an administration. And when that happens, sometimes you have a change in judges. And so it can feel like, even if we win, are they gonna actually administer this policy? Basically, there were a lot of things that made me feel like, man, maybe I'm really not making as much of a difference for animals as I want to. So then, that's where I learned to kind of ask myself this second question, right? The animals that we're helping with this Prop 12 that I'm spending so much time defending, they're still gonna be slaughtered and sold for food, right? So am I really making a difference in their life? Maybe. We argue that yes, right, because it will be a better life, but it's not going to end the abuse. It's not going to end the fact that they go to a slaughterhouse. So some of the choices, right, this answer is yes, but sometimes it still felt like no. I had one case that we also worked on when we did endangered species litigation. That often felt more like yes. Because while this animal, so it was usually animals who were in zoos or animals who were in rescues that were not the rescues that we have here today among us. And what I would find is, a court was very unlikely. You see it sometimes, like in Tiger King, which was a crazy case. But a court is very unlikely to take away someone's animals. But what they might make them do is change the way that they live on those properties, okay? So that felt like more yes. And this also definitely felt like yes when those cases came around. So working at the Animal Legal Defense Fund was like a kind of day-to-day battle, day-to-day struggle of asking myself, like, what am I doing today? Is it making a difference? And the third question, again, would come up, is this influencing cultural and societal attitudes towards animals? That was a definite yes most of my time at ALDF. And again, that is, I think, one of the things that people underestimate and don't think about as much, and I think it's important to keep you motivated on the days where, Jeremy mentioned, you really feel helpless. So then I worked for Gerber Animal Law, and that was a lot of companion animal stuff because it's not a nonprofit. And so, as you may or may not know, animals are property under North Carolina state law. So that career was interesting because was I making a difference? Was I reducing the suffering of an individual animal? Honestly, most of the time, yes. Because usually it was a dog that was being abused, a cat that was being abused, a rescue that was not a real rescue, and we were able to get those animals to good homes. So that felt good. Did it help end systemic animal abuse? Sometimes, right? Dogs and cats and companion animals generally, the systemic abuse is different. The powers that be tend to support initiatives, right? We have an animal control. We actually have governmental departments that will go and investigate abuse of a dog or a cat most of the time. And that can feel really good. But that job was hard down here. Because in order to win my case, I couldn't argue this animal is not property. I had to argue because this animal is property, it should go to this person. Or because there's a contract dictating ownership of this animal, these people should win it. So sometimes I felt conflicted about that job because, God, I'm really just promoting the idea, really just working within the confines of saying animals are property. Unlike at ALDF, where we would challenge the status of animals, right? We would say, no, they're not property. Judge, you should change the law. So again, it came down to me realizing just because one of these answers was no, didn't mean that I wasn't making a difference or making an impact. It just meant that depending on what I was doing and where I was working, the impact was going to be different. And in both of those careers, ALDF and Gerber Animal Law, I was making a difference, right? It just didn't look the same. And, you know, it took me reflecting on that. At the time, I didn't feel that way. I felt very conflicted. It's now that I stand here having done those things and reflected back on them that I say, no, I did make a difference. I'm glad I did those things. And this is now how I go about framing the choices that I make moving forward, because I think especially as activists, right, it can feel like we're never doing enough. It can feel like I'm not doing this the right way. When at the end of the day, it's really all about doing something. And as long as you can get to a yes on one of these questions, you are making a difference. So now we look at social choices. And I have like social activism here. And again, I think within the animal, rights world, the animal rights community, there can be a lot of judgment about different types of activism. Direct action, right? Does anyone know what direct action is? Yeah, so you go into a, factory farm or sometimes a slaughterhouse, you take the animals out, or you go onto the property and you protest, or, you actually break the law. You've got cubes of truth, which I think Anonymous for the Voiceless is most famous for, but other groups do them as well, where you just show footage of animals being slaughtered or on a farm, and show the reality, make people confront it. You have those kinds of in-your-face activism. You have, I think most famously, it's like the spectrum of like PETA and like Humane Society or whatever it's called now, Humane Internet. I forget what they changed their name to. But I also worked for them briefly in undergrad. But so there's like a spectrum, right? And I'm sure people have heard of the Overton window. No? Okay. So some people, yes. So the Overton window is this, basically it's this, again, not a sociologist, so just repeating what I've learned about it. I have no I didn't create it, but you do learn about it in law school for cultural attitudes and societal attitudes in general. And I do think it's very relevant to our political climate. The Overton window is basically a window of what people are willing to accept as reasonable and acceptable in society. And on one end, you have radical, and on the other end, you have conservative, kind of stuck in the past. Now, this window shifts, right, from pressure on both sides. And so something that seemed entirely radical in the 1970s, right, like women having bank accounts, now seems like, oh my God, like conservative is like, it's like way over here. The Overton window shifted. Right? And you see that same thing in animal rights and animal activism. And so I think rather than focusing on, is this animal activism or is this animal, whatever this protest, whatever this social activism that I'm doing, where is it in the Overton window, right? Is it actually contributing to pushing it forward? Is it contributing to keeping what's reasonable now reasonable? Is it fighting against moving it back? Because the Overton window does not always go this way, right? It can go right back to where it came from, depending on the lobbying, the initiatives, social and cultural attitudes, what other people's activism looks like, and we've seen that, right? In courts. We've seen that in legislature. We see that today, right? The Overton window is not, there's that quote that's like the arc of history bends towards justice. And great, inspiring, but I think it lends itself to like a feeling of inevitability. And I think we're all living through a time where we're seeing this shift, whatever it is, arc of history, Overton window, not inevitable, right? It comes at the cost of people making choices to push that window, to push that arc of history towards the right direction. And so all of that to say, I think things like direct action are criticized as incredibly radical, turning people off, right? It's you're breaking the law. And in many ways, they are right. It probably is turning people off. it is a little bit radical, and people are probably not going to accept it. But I also think that it's pushing the Overton window. And if you look at my 3 questions, right, it kind of relates to that. So does the direct action reduce individual animal suffering? Most of the time, yes. They are taking a dead or dying animal out of a facility, usually hiding them from the FBI, who decides that that's worth a manhunt for some reason, for that individual chicken. But that animal usually ends up fine, right? Does it end systemic animal abuse? Honestly, not really, right? Because what happens is usually the community rallies around whoever got their property stolen. The government starts to say you're terrorists, right? So honestly, not really, right? And I think this is where people kind of get stuck, right? Does it influence cultural and societal attitudes? Yes, but some people argue, and I think it's valid, maybe not in the best way, right? Those crazy animal people, they're going to come and take your shit, like they're going to steal your whatever. But the answer to this is still yes. So I would argue, still makes a difference, still worth doing, okay? And I don't know if y'all are familiar with Wayne Sung of Direct Action Everywhere. So it is worth Googling, and or I can see if Jeremy will look it up afterwards. There's something in the law called jury nullification. Does anybody know what that is? So you may or may not know that if you're on a jury and you've sworn to uphold the law, you've been presented with the case, you have to make a decision based on the law, they tell you have to. But you don't actually have to. Okay? You do not get in trouble. It is not illegal as a juror. It is not illegal or against the law as a group of people to decide, you know what? They may have done it, but we don't want to convict them. You can go into that jury room and say, hey guys, not guilty, right? Like, let's just go out and say that. Because what you say in the jury room is completely private, right? Unless you choose to disclose it, and you cannot get in trouble for that. It's called jury nullification. Basically, a jury saying, this might be the law, but we don't agree with it, and we think that it shouldn't be applied in this case. And that's exactly what happened in Wayne's case. They had a case where he went into the farm, they took a chicken, and they launched this huge campaign. They charged him with felonies, they charged him with theft, and the lawyers got up and they tried to compare this to stealing a can of soup. And the jury was kind of appalled at that analogy. And what happened is this professor from Harvard, and this is what I'll have him send you, did a study afterwards where he reached out to these jurors. And he was like, hey, going into this, how did you feel? Totally guilty. Like, he clearly did it, right? We should find him guilty. At the end of it, they came back and they said no. I mean, on the law, yeah, he went into he trespassed, he took the chicken, he left. Okay, right? That technically is breaking the law. But the jury said, I didn't like the way that they did this. Now, they did end up articulating, well, we thought that the intent wasn't there. Like, they kind of found a legal hook for it, because like I said, you can redefine anything in the law, right, and argue about what things mean. But the reality is that was a pure case of jury nullification. The jury was like, this is ridiculous. Why am I here arguing about this? Like, clearly this guy saw a dying chicken and thought it would be, they weren't going to be able to kill the chicken anyway, whatever. They were like, this is stupid. You're making a dumb argument. And I'm going to go ahead and say that this guy shouldn't get in trouble. Okay, and that is a yes. Now, the action of doing that initially probably leaned towards no. But I think that jury interview was amazing because no one on that jury was vegan. No one on that, that jury was from the town where this happened, right? They knew this farmer, they knew this farm. They were kind of initially appalled by this behavior. And they got together as a group in that jury room and said, actually, he might have a point. So I think that when it comes to, again, criticizing certain types of activism, not that they're invalid, but I also think it's helpful to think about it this way. What is this thing actually achieving? And when it comes to your personal type of activism, right, which of those three things, or which of these three questions most resonate with you? Do you most want to contribute to? Right? Is this most important? Is this most important? Is this most important to you personally? Because again, I don't think any one of these things I'm not arguing that one of these should be yes, whatever, right? I think that they all can resonate with an individual on an individual level. And so, social activism and social choices are important. Now, I work on the ABA Subcommittee for Animals and Agriculture, and that's basically a bunch of lawyers who get together and try and help craft, the ABA, I'm sorry, is the American Bar Association. Again, remembering, not law students here. It's the American Bar Association. And what I love about that is we don't do a lot of this because we're not litigating. We're just here discussing what should be the policy of the ABA. Should we make a statement? So we're able to issue statements on behalf of the American Bar Association Committee. And we've done that with COVID. We've done that with Prop 12. We've done that with what's going on right now with bird flu. And we're able to write op-eds and things like that. So, the 2 hours that I spend a week on that, is it doing this? Probably not really. Is it doing this? Maybe. But most of the time it's doing this. The answer is yes. So I think it's still worth doing, right? I think it's still worth taking 2 hours. Again, this joke may not land because you're not lawyers, but of my billable time that I'm supposed to get to contribute to this, to work on this. Same with my meet on the board at Piedmont, right? Definitely yes, this. I mean, we've got over 100 animals there. Their lives are amazing. Please come out and visit. I know there's so many wonderful sanctuaries here today, and Piedmont is one of them. Does it help end systemic animal abuse? Well, by itself, just the sanctuary, no. But we also do a lot of tabling. We also do a lot of education. We do tours, right? We're not doing the direct action that Wayne was doing. We're not going out and taking animals to put on our refuge, right? But they come to us anyway. And so I think, especially if people are at a point in their life where they're feeling helpless and they're feeling like, I want to do something different. And this was a hard choice for me too, because I left nonprofit. I left Gerber Animal Law, and I work at a big law firm now, basically. And it was hard for me because I had my whole, basically, life, right, since I was in college, was like, I'm going to do animal rights law. That's what I'm going to do. And I kind of started to realize that for my mental health, right, and for my well-being as a human, it wasn't necessarily the career for me. But that doesn't mean that the choices that I'm making today are not making a difference for animals. That doesn't mean they're not making an impact, right? And that doesn't mean that I'm doing less than I was before. I think you can be in any career, right, and still make a difference with your daily choices, with your social choices, and again, even with your career choices, just by going out to dinner with your colleagues, right? Just by talking about things in the office, just by existing as a professional woman or man in a corporate world as a vegan. That throws people off. Just being vegan throws people off. Even if they don't know why you are. They're just like, what in the world? Especially practicing in North Carolina. So brief little story. A lot of North Carolina counties are still very, very rural. And I have to travel all over the state for my job. And there are some courthouses where women are still not allowed to wear pants. So if you show up to court as a woman and a vegan, you are throwing those men for a loop. Opposing counsel, right, will be like, let's, can we go out for coffee? Can we go out for lunch after this hearing? Sure. Are there any vegan options? Totally thrown for a loop, right? So you're fighting certain cultural attitudes on many different fronts. But again, that will stick with that person. It just will. Because they might think of you as the crazy big law North Carolina lawyer, but they'll still tell their friends, hey, guess what? This crazy woman lawyer who wore pants also was a vegan. Threw me off. So I would ask, anyone who is struggling with those decisions, wants to talk about them, anything like that, please stay in touch. This is my email. This is my phone number. Totally happy to give it out. Really don't care. I have a different work phone, so this is just me, my personal phone. And then that's, social media for all the youngins out there if you want to stay in touch. Feel free to DM me, as the hip kids say. And I would love to talk more about any of this. This framework that I use, if you're struggling with a decision to make and kind of want to talk through things, I'm more than happy to. And so, again, it was an honor to be here, really excited to kind of share what I've learned so far in my life. And I'll turn it over now for questions if there are any. Or if not, you know, I can talk more, whatever. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit, because I see a lot of people are so young and I'm so happy to see that.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the raid on, I forget if it was Tyson or Butterball, where the government tipped them off that this was coming. Can you talk a little bit?
So where was that? Do you know?
I don't know which county, but it was the sheriff's department.
The sheriffs?
That led the charge
Okay.
against the government.
Yeah. And I will say that I think that that's, so I don't know specifics about that more than what you've just said that it happened, but I will say that is also another dynamic, right? Like state, local attitudes versus big federal attitudes. And like, again, I think the jury nullification is a good example of that. The federal prosecutor came in assuming that all of these local people would be on the side of this big ag farmer, and they weren't. I think there is power and gravity.
Ingredients from testing on animals, but how far should we really go? Like,
Yeah.
should I prevent the product that has an ingredient that's been previously already tested?
Right.
Or should I avoid the whole company if it's not cruelty-free? Like, what's yours?
That's so great question, and I think this the framework that I talked about can help answer that, right? So, for example, I've got, like, let's say I've got whatever, a mascara or a, you know, blush or whatever, and it has a product, right, that used to be tested on animals, or it's from a company that tests on animals, right, but the product itself is not tested on animals. So, does this choice reduce individual animal suffering? Like, no, let's be honest. No, it doesn't, because I'm buying it, it's vegan, it's no longer being tested on animals. So it's not really, the answer to that is kind of no. And a lot of people will stop there, right? So, okay, it's fine. And like, again, no judgment on that, just saying there's a couple other questions to ask. Does this choice help end systemic animal abuse? So the product is no longer being tested on animals, right? So maybe, right? Because now I'm buying a product specifically because of that, and that will show up as a consumer choice. But it's from a company that still tests on animals. So actually, maybe not. So that's where it becomes a question of relativity, right? It depends. Again, lawyer, not telling you what's right or wrong, but ask the question, right? You may decide, yes, it does, because even though this company might still test on animals, I'm choosing this product, right, that is not. And again, my consumer choice will indicate them that it's not. And then you go to the third one, though. Does this influence cultural and societal attitudes towards animals? If somebody says, you're vegan, what kind of makeup do you use? What answer do you want to give? Just have thought about it, right? Be able to explain. Maybe you say, I don't buy from this company. Or I do buy from this company, but only these products, right? Have an answer to that question. That's what really, I think, this question does for a lot of choices. I think, then they kind of the same question like Burger King when they came out with the Impossible Burger. Do I go to Burger King and get the Impossible Whopper? Oh my God. Is it reducing individual animal suffering? Like, no. They're still selling the same amount of burgers because I wouldn't go there anyway, so I'm just a new customer. Does it end systemic animal abuse? No, but, you know, consumer choice is great. Does it influence cultural and societal attitudes towards animals? Actually, I think that one was a whopping, no pun intended, yes. Like, oh my God, first fast food industry to sell a vegan option. That's huge. Like, a lot of people were criticizing that, like, oh, you're supporting, you know, this company. But, like, again, they were all going to go to Burger King anyway, right? Like, I wasn't going there and getting meat before and then change. Like, I'm a new customer. And the reason that I'm a new customer is because you're doing this. And so, again, that was my analysis of this. Some people had a different one, and that's fine. But I think that this framework is helpful for things like that, because if someone asks, like, oh my God, how are you supporting, you're giving your money to Burger King? I'm like, yeah, I am. But that's because I think it's important that it become acceptable and it become normal and it become a big deal that companies make a different decision. That's important for me in my activism, right? Yeah.
Going back to standing on behalf of animal rights.
Yeah.
How do we go about changing it so that we can get standing on behalf
Well, so, okay, this will be the last question. So it's different when it comes to state and federal. So standing has a lot of, I mean, that's been something since the founding of the country that judges have written opinions on. And so there's a lot of case law on it. It's pretty well established in the sense of it's based in the federal Constitution. So if you want to change it federally, you're going to need like a constitutional amendment, basically. But on a local level, right, on a state level, you could literally lobby for a law that says, you know, under this animal cruelty statute, we are going to make sure that people can bring a lawsuit on behalf of the animals themselves as individuals. If you can get that language into a statute, I as a lawyer can argue that they're standing. Right? You don't even need to put the word standing in it to alert people that that's what you're doing. You just need to say, this law is designed to protect the animals. This law is designed to give the animals the right to appear before this tribunal, right? And so any language you can get or lobby for or encourage others to legislate for that changes the difference between property and person in the law is like, that is huge. Because one thing that's tricky about standing is there's not a law that's like standing is this. It's one of those things that judges have essentially interpreted through case law, right? And they've defined this kind of, you know, amalgamous concept of standing, right? And they've issued decisions. So this is standing and this is standing and this is standing and this is not. And so if we can bring cases where we can argue this is, that's how you change it. That's how you change the law. And so 19A is great because you can get case law on it. And I'll quickly finish by saying, I think a lot of policymakers and general activists don't know a lot about this stuff. And I think that that's a real shame because I, as a lawyer, like when I'm in the courtroom, like I'm looking at this law, I'm like, God, if someone had just put in like one word about how this is meant to protect animals, I would have an amazing argument. And a lot of times it's just people don't realize that. So that's why I think something like this is great because it brings together lawyers and it brings together activists and it brings together policymakers, and these conversations are really important. All right, done? All right, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.